This is the second of what I think will be 4 videos, just revising improving performance. And this is going to deal with what are the planning considerations for improving performance. So what does the coach or the manager need to consider when they are planning to train their athletes and planning for their athletes' performance? What do they need to consider to maximize the athlete's performance? And we are asked to look at initial planning considerations, initial meaning first or at the start. We are asked to deal with periodization, that is dividing the training year up and training months up and phases into sections so that we can achieve specific goals. Designing a training session, that is what we do first and second and third and fourth and how we finish the session. And also avoidance of overtraining, both physically and mentally. All right, so if we look at that first one, initial planning considerations, things that we need to consider when we're planning our training session, the performance and fitness needs of the athletes. All right, so we may have a new little 5-year-old who's starting a sport for the first time and their performance is very low and their fitness is fairly low. Then we might have a teenager or a representative player whose performance is going to be higher and their fitness needs will be greater. And then we might have an elite athlete who's going to be performing at a high level and their fitness needs will be very high. So we need to take those things into account when planning the training session. We wouldn't train our 5-year-old beginner the same as we would train our 16-year-old representative player. They wouldn't be able to handle the fitness, they wouldn't have any fun, and we would be expecting more performance of them than they can give. I've said here the plan must incorporate the goals. Okay, the fitness of the player, their age, their current skill level, and so we need to consider those things when devising the plan, what we're going to do at training. We need to consider structuring our training session. So we need to make sure that it is safe. We can't structure it so that players or participants are going to be doing unsafe things. It needs to be relevant to the sport that they're playing and relevant to what stage of the season that they are in. They need to have time to practice. So if we're going to teach them new skills, we've got to give them time to practice those skills. It's no good having a training session where we do a warm-up and then I teach them a new skill and then say, okay, it's time to cool down. They haven't had any time to practice, especially in those first 2 stages of skill acquisition. My training session will need to be flexible, so it may not run exactly as I wanted to. Something that I had planned to take 10 minutes might take 15 minutes, or a skill that I thought might take 30 minutes to acquire and practice, all of the players may get it straight away. So I need to be a little bit flexible and be able to change the time and the difficulty of things. We also need a good balance between skills and fitness and tactics. All right, so an athlete that's just got lots of good skills but they're not fit and they don't understand the tactics of the game is not going to have improved performance. They might understand the tactics of the game, but they're not fit and their skills are really bad, and equally that's not going to. So at a training session, I might aim to do some skills practice, some fitness practice, and some tactical development. All right, so that's our structure of the training session. Sorry about that index finger. The next thing we need to consider is the schedule, depending on how you say it, the schedule of events. And that will come into periodization in a little while. So we need to structure the training session so that it takes into account the type and intensity of training that we should be doing to suit the finals or the peaks. We don't want to be doing dangerous, very intense activities, say just before our game on the weekend, like on Friday evening, because we have to have a little mini peak on the weekend. And so we're going to make sure that depending on when the training session is and where our games are or where our finals are or where our gala day is, that our training type and intensity suits that. We also will need to consider the climate. For example, if you are training for a sport and the climate's horrible outside, you're in a country where it snows all winter but you still have to train, you might have to consider, say, training indoors or undercover, or using the type of training that you can do in that climate. We also have to consider, just down the bottom there, the availability of resources. So fields may not be available. We might want to train for football, but the cricketers are still using the field and we don't want to chew it up, so that resource is not available to us at that time. We also need to consider initially the climate and the season. We need some options if the climate or if the weather is too bad, if it's too hot, too cold, too wet. We need to have some options there so that we can still train. We can't just say, look, we're not going to train for the next 3 weeks because there's going to be a heat wave, or training's called off every time it's rainy, because then we're going to miss out on some training sessions. And also, some of our training should allow athletes to acclimatise, that is, to train how you compete. So if some of your racing is going to be done in the rain, some of your training needs to be done in the rain. If you are going to be playing netball in summer, then some of your training needs to take place in hot or humid environments. All right, and this is sort of the specificity principle, I guess, where we want to, you don't want to be doing a bike race in the rain and you've never ridden your bike in the rain. That would be kind of nonsensical. Okay, we move on now to periodization, and you've got various graphs about this. So the first question I've asked is, why periodize? What does it allow us to do? What do you gain? All right, so dividing our training year up does a few things. It limits reversibility because we are going to keep training during the off season. All right, we don't just train and then do the finals and then do nothing. It is going to allow us to peak for events. Now that might be the Olympics, so it might be a 4-year peak. It might be the finals, say a peak at the end of the year. You might need lots of little mini peaks every couple of weeks if you're doing triathlons, or you may need to peak every weekend in a minor way and then a big one for the finals. So periodization allows us to plan for that. Periodization, dividing the training year up, allows for adequate recovery, which is going to prevent overtraining. It also allows us to taper before events. So if we're peaking for the weekends, our Friday training sessions are probably fairly easy. If we are peaking for the Olympics, our last 3 or 4 days leading up to the Olympics, depending on the sport, might have a lower intensity or a lower training time. It will allow us, periodization will allow us to target specific goals like fitness goals. So I might say, look, team's looking a bit unfit, our cardiovascular fitness is low after the off season, so we are going to do a micro cycle or a mesocycle dealing mainly with fitness. It might be a skill goal that we're after. It might be a psychological goal that we're after, such as maintaining motivation or controlling anxiety during games. We may actually write into our periodization plan for the year a time to work at anxiety control. Or we might be doing a microcycle about communication, where we practice communication drills for a certain part of the season, and also tactics. Periodization also allows us to reduce injury, not completely, but during important parts of the season. Okay, so we might keep our weight training and our strength building finishing up 4 to 6 weeks before the season starts, because that is something that you're likely to get injured doing. So if we look at frequency, intensity, time and type, we may not work most intensely during the season, or do types of exercise that are more likely to cause injury. And also our periodization is going to allow us to avoid overtraining and allay boredom a bit, because we can plan out some different types of activities for different parts of the season. All right, that's periodization. Why would we do it? Now, what is periodization? We've got phases. So the whole year is divided up into pre-season, in-season and post-season. It will vary between sports, obviously. We might have a macro cycle. Macro generally means big. So this might go for 3 to 6 weeks. We might be doing a 4-week macro cycle aimed at improving strength or power. And this is to address, that should have 2 Ds, skill and fitness, or some other goals. We then may have within that a micro cycle that goes for, say, a week or 10 days or 2 weeks or 3 days. And the micro cycle is going to target specific things within that. So let's say if you were going to look at developing a new tactic, you would do it within a micro cycle. All right, be familiar with the concept of peaking, which is timing your health and your weight and your fuel stores for a maximum effort or a maximum performance at the right time. That's what a peak is. And we talk about tapering, so reducing the frequency, intensity, time or type to allow for this peak to occur. If you don't taper your training, if you keep training right up to the last minute and then go out and compete, you are unlikely to perform as best possible. And that taper will allow an increase in VO2 max, reduce your chance of injury, increase your strength, decrease your lactate levels, and increase your fuel stores. They'll all be ready to go. Think of it as kind of resting up, I guess, before an event. Okay. Now we move on to, sorry about that, designing a training session. So once again, what are the planning considerations? And designing a training session we're talking about. So you've probably all been to a training session for one thing or another, I'm sure, netball, footy, darts, archery, whatever. And you could probably think logically the way that training session is conducted. All right, so we're thinking about it from a planning point of view. So we're the coach or the manager. And the first thing that we're going to consider is health and safety. So we need a safe, healthy environment, no things sticking up out of the ground, no uncovered goalposts. We're not training in an area that's right next to an industry and toxic gases are floating across. We'd be considering the health of our athletes, if any of them has pre-existing conditions, and the safety of the equipment, of course, and the safety of the drills and skills practices that we're going to do. Probably the next thing that would happen once everybody is there and we've got our equipment ready is the warm-up. Now we would do a general warm-up, which is just to get core temperature up and improve muscle elasticity. So that might be things like a jog and a stretch and star jumps. And then we would do a specific warm-up, which is going to have exercises that are similar to those which we will be doing in the game. So general warm-up, then specific warm-up. We would then outline the session for the athlete. So we'd say, okay, guys and girls, here is what we're going to be doing today. For the first 10 minutes, we're doing this. The next half an hour, we're doing that. Then we're going to be working on communication, and then we are going to develop a new deceptive tactic. So let the athletes know what they're aiming at and what they're going to be doing and why. We would then, if we were going to do some skills in the session, we'd do the skills first while the athletes are not tired. We wouldn't do our fitness work and have them all sore muscles and tired out and then say, okay, we're going to practice some skills, because they're just not going to have their head in it, and also their muscles will be tired, they'll be less coordinated. Okay, so skills first, then our conditioning, once the skills have been done, and followed by a cool down. Now you want to think why you would want to do a cool down, and if you remember back to the definition, it was to return the body to a pre-exercise state. So to bring the core temperature down slowly, to disperse waste products like carbon dioxide and lactic acid. Okay, so think about why we do that cool down. What is it that you want to build back up? Your fuel stores. What is it that you want to remove? Waste products. What is it that we want to restore? We want to restore immune function, so we do an active cool down. If you just go and sit down, your immune function will stay down. You're likely to get sick within the 2 hours after the training session. Whereas if we do an active cool down, bring the body temperature down slowly and the heart rate down slowly, that immune function is restored in 20 minutes to half an hour. And then of course we do an evaluation. Did the training session work? Did it not work? This may be something that you discuss with the players or the athletes, or it might be something that the coach does by themselves or in conjunction with the manager. Okay, so that's our designing a training session. And the last bit here is avoidance of overtraining. Now this has actually been examined a lot. I think it's shown up in 3 HSCs and a couple of them recently. If I had to take a bet, I'd say they're not going to hit it again this year. That's in 2016, but don't bank on it. So avoidance of overtraining is if we've had too much frequency. So we've trained the athlete too often, too intensely, for too long a time. The training sessions have just gone too long, or we have done types of training that are just physically and mentally draining on the athlete. We may end up with an overtrained athlete, or if we give them inadequate recovery. So after their game on Saturday, they're straight back into training on Sunday morning, or after grand finals, we start straight into some hard training the following week. We're going to end up with an athlete that has inadequate recovery physically and mentally, and they might start showing signs of overtraining. Now, they could be physiologically, remember physio is physical, physiologically overtrained, where we might start to see injuries like shin splints, sore muscles. We might start to see lethargy. A lethargic person is one who just sort of walks around. We might see fatigue. We might see a reduce in performance. We might measure their VO2 max and find out it's going down for some reason, even though they're training really hard. We might see their strength drop. Okay, so we might see these physiological worsenings, I guess. Or we might see some psychological problems in an overtrained athlete. Their motivation might be down. They might be more anxious. They might be cranky or sad. They might be showing signs of mental fatigue. All right, so we've got our physiological repercussions and our psychological repercussions. So what do we do to ensure either that overtraining doesn't happen or to fix it if it does happen? We monitor our athlete. We take some biometric measurements so that we know, are they getting better or worse, more or less stressed? We allow them time to recover. We allow them time to taper before an event, and we plan that into our training sessions and our periodization. We use some variety. We vary the frequency, the intensity, the time, and the type of exercises to reduce the chance of overtraining. We set goals with the athletes if they're having trouble with motivation. We give them time for relaxation. We make sure that their nutrition and hydration are right, because if they're not eating enough and taking on enough fuel, we could end up with an overtrained athlete or one who is regularly dehydrated at training sessions. All right, and there finishes up the second of our 4 videos. The next one will deal with ethical issues.